Okay, thank you so much, Mara. I'm going to adjust my view here. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is put the source sheet in the chat, and I'll remind everyone that you will receive a PDF after the session from Mara. This particular document will close, so you will not have access to it after the session, but you will get a PDF. So as Mara said, we're going to look a little bit at where we are in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bimidbar, and then move into a story from this week's Parsha, this week's Torah portion, and last week's. It's the beginning of this week's Torah portion is actually a continuation of last week, and it is a really difficult section of the Torah. And you can see I put in twice that I am giving a trigger warning. There is violence of a sexual nature in the Torah portion. So if that's something that you want to log off for, or you want to head out for, of course, I understand, but please note that it is a really difficult section of the Torah. So before we read some of that together, I'm going to share my screen.
I know Zoom updated recently, but you should have, okay. Great.
Yeah, I can share. And let me just adjust my view here so I can see as many people as possible at the same time. Okay. So I want us to just note together that we're at the very end of the book of Bimidbar, the book of Numbers, and there's a lot of technicalities at the end of this book, because really the first 4 books of the Torah, excluding Deuteronomy, Devarim, the 5th book, can be seen as a unit. And so the Israelites are getting ready to enter into the lands of Israel at the end of the book of Numbers, at the end of this Torah, at the end of Bimidbar. And we still get, you can see, I'm not going to go through all of the pieces here, but it's pretty good outline, and you can reference that this week and next week. There is a really interesting, and I feel like I've done this with my Jewish learners before. There's a really interesting part of this Torah portion, which we're not going to get to today, about the daughters of Zelophehad in chapter 27, the first few, I think it's like the first 9 or 11 verses. So if you don't know that story already, that is a little bit more of a feel-good story, and I'll encourage you to read that. We might reference it a little bit today, but we are going to do a difficult text today. So before we dive into the story of Pinchas, I want us to take a look here at just a map, a couple maps, just so we're situated, and when we encounter some directions, some specifics in the verses that we read, we have a sense of what we're talking about. So here's the land of Israel, called Canaan in the Torah. And you can see Moab and Midian are 2 nations to the east of the land of Israel that are mentioned as enemies of Israel multiple times. I know you studied the story of Bilam last week, also great story. And Moab and Midian are 2 enemies, 2 nations mentioned in that story, and they're going to be mentioned today also. And as you can see, also the one specific location that's mentioned is Shittim. So here it's mentioned in our book of Numbers, and also in Joshua and Yehoshua. So that just situates us geographically. So what we're going to do together today, and I have a lot of notes here, which I'm not going to read all out loud. We're really going to dive into the text, and I might reference them. This is Everett Fox's translation. So as you can see, Everett Fox uses a replica of the Tetragrammaton, the 4 letters of God's name. So if I'm going to invite somebody to read, per usual, and you can just say God instead of the 4 letters of God's name. And we're going to start with the end of last week's Torah portion. And then we'll move on to the beginning of this week, since it's all one unit. Okay, any questions or reflections? I'll take a couple before we begin to read text. If anyone does want to chime in, we will stop in between sections. If you've studied with me before, you know that we'll pause for questions and reflections throughout. Okay. Okay, so I am going to ask someone if they'd like to read the first group of verses. It's only 5 verses in English. And I see Ginny, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, you raised your hand. So you can go ahead and unmute and read the first 5 verses. And I am literally going to ask you to stop after each verse because I may want to insert a comment. So just pause briefly and I may share something additional. So Ginny, go ahead and thank you.
Okay. Israel stayed in Shittim, Acacia, so the people began to whore with the women of Moab.
Okay, keep going. Thank you.
They, the women of Moab, called the people of Israel for sacrifices to their gods. The people of Israel ate and bowed down to their gods. Some kind of sexual cult behavior. I'm sorry.
Okay, so no, you're good. All good. So that's what exactly I just want to highlight that we are meant to understand. Scholars think that there's some kind of sexual activity combined with offerings to gods here. So Ginny, thank you. Oh, I lost. Oh, there you are, Ginny. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, and Israel attached themselves to the Baal of Peor, so the anger of Hashem flared up against Israel. And Hashem said to Moshe, take all the heads of the people and impale them to Hashem, facing the sun, so that the flaming anger of Hashem may turn from Israel. Moshe said to the officials of Israel, let each man kill those of his men who yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor.
Okay, great. Ginny, thank you so much. So just to sum up and also share a little bit more information, throughout the Hebrew Bible, as I'm sure we often have very experienced and knowledgeable learners on MJL calls. So I'm sure there's constant struggle with Israel worshiping other gods. And this is one example of a situation where they do that. Baal is a name, it's sort of a generic name used for other gods. But scholars do think that Baal Peor is a local fertility storm god, just a little bit detailed, but there is just some writing out there about who that was in particular. I don't think it matters so much for the story, except that there's some kind of sexual activity going on here, and at the same time, Baal Peor is a fertility god, so there's that connection. But here we are, we have a situation of idol worship, and really interestingly, God's punishment, which is that all the heads of the people who participated in this activity, everybody should be impaled. But Moshe then says, let each man kill those of his men who yoked themselves, attached themselves to the Baal of Peor. So Moses edits God's punishment and says, actually, no, not everyone should be killed. And we know Moshe does this throughout the Torah. Moshe titrates, he reins in God's anger. And here it's not everybody that will be killed. It's just the people who participated. Okay, so that's I think that's a good thing about the story. It's interesting. And as the story continues, and if Ginny, if you don't mind, I actually might ask you to read a little bit more. You read so beautifully. We're about to read the second part of the story, still in last week's Parsha. And what happens next is sort of like an add-on. It's an additional layer to the story, and it's set in the context of the plague. That the plague is often the word used for these killings that take place when Israel greatly sins. And so we're supposed to understand that people are in the middle of being killed. The people who participated were in the middle of this plague of killing. And so Ginny, if you don't mind, let's read verses 6 through 9 also. and then we'll continue. So Jenny, you can go ahead. And thank
Now
you again.
here, a man of the children of Israel had come and had brought near to his brothers a certain Midianitess before the eyes of Moshe and before the eyes of the entire community of the children of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of appointment. Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aharon the priest, saw the Israelite man and Midianite woman together. So he arose from the midst of the community and took a spear in his hand. He came after the man of Israel into the private chamber, and he thrust through the two of them, the man of Israel and the woman in her private parts, and the plague that the leaders were to kill the people involved with Baal Peor was held back from the children of Israel. And those who died of the plague were 24,000.
Okay, strange number, I know. So
Yes.
yeah, I know. I'm not really sure why that is, but nevertheless, here's what happened. So in the midst of this plague, in other words, people are already being punished for participating in this activity, and still, this is really there's a Hebrew word lahachis, like to really make someone, to really piss someone off. There's this it seems very provocative act by right now a nameless person who engages in activity with a Midianite woman, an enemy woman. And so he's continuing to participate in whatever's going on here, despite the fact that people are being killed. That's the idea. And then we get this famous story, which you may have encountered before in your studies, of Pinchas, the son of the high priest Eleazar, the son of the priest Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the high priest. And he, out of anger, vengeance, this real sense of self-righteousness, righteous indignation, whatever, he kills the woman and the man engaged in sexual activity. And you could see it just really horribly. You can see very vividly. He comes into this private chamber, thrusts the two of them, the man of Israel and the woman in her private parts. And when that happens, the plague stops. So, if you have heard this story before, if you're like me, you've read this story before, but every time you read it, it's almost like disbelief, and it's maybe it shouldn't be so hard to believe, given, this text is over 2,000 years old, but we have this pretty horrible story here. And we're going to do a little bit more reading. We're going to read together from this week's Parsha, which is really an add-on about the legacy. It's almost like a midrash, an interpretation within the Torah itself. And I just want to show you what we're about to talk about here, just in case some clarification would be helpful. So all the priests come from the Levite tribe, from this line that's bolded here, from Aaron. Levi is one of Jacob's sons. The Levites all serve in the sanctuary. And the high priesthood and the priesthood come through Aaron's line. Eleazar, the son of Aaron, he's already been given the priesthood. You might remember a story where Nadav and Avihu are killed for bringing an incense offering that God did not ask for. And now we're told that Phineas, because he did this thing we're about to read, he's rewarded with the priesthood continuing through his line, through Eleazar's line, through specifically this one son of Eleazar the priest. So this is your priesthood visual aid, and now we can go back to the story. So I'm going to ask another person. Ginny, thank you so much for reading. I'm going to ask for one more reader just for these verses here, 10 through 18, also very difficult verses about Pinchas's legacy. And we're going to talk a little bit more today about this covenant of peace and what you think that might mean, what our tradition says that might mean. I will tell you now, I wish there was sort of an easier answer to this, but we're going to talk about it together. So, okay, Sheila, thank you so much for raising your hands. and you can read verses 10 through 18. I think you should be able to, I think you're unmuted. Okay, let's ask, I don't know if, let's ask, I'll ask for another reader. Maybe we'll come back to Sheila. Maybe she had a question. So can someone else volunteer just to read a few more verses here? Ayala, thank you so much.
God spoke to Moshe, saying, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, son of Aharon the priest, has turned my venomous anger from the children of Israel in his being zealous with my zealous rage in their midst, so that I did not destroy the children of Israel in my zealous rage. Therefore say, Here I give him my covenant of shalom. It shall be for him and for his seed after him a covenant of everlasting priesthood, because that he was zealous for his God and effected appeasement for the children of Israel. Now the name of the man of Israel, the one struck down with the Midianites, Zimri, son of Salu, leader of a father's house of the Shimonites. And the name of the woman who was struck down, the Midianites, Cosbi, daughter of Tsur, tribal head of the father's house of Midian was he. Now God spoke to Moshe, saying, Harass the Midianites and strike them, for they were harassing you with their craftiness, with which they were crafty with you in the matter of Peor, in the matter of Cosbi, daughter of the leader of Midian, their sister, the one struck dead at the time of the plague in the matter of Peor.
Okay, Ayala, thank you so much. Thank you both to Ayala and Jenny for great reading. So a couple things here that I want to point out, and then I want to open it up for some comments before we read commentaries. So as you might recall, in the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, the Aseret Hadibrot, the first part of the Decalogue is really God saying, not just don't worship other gods, I am your only God, don't worship other gods, but if you do, you will be punished. I'm a jealous God. And we see that happening here. Sometimes kin'ah, this Hebrew root kuf nun he, is translated as zealous, sometimes as jealous, similar words in English, but it's repeated, as you can see here, multiple times. And Everett Fox translates it as a zealous rage. God cannot handle when people, according to God, betray God in any way in this worshiping of other gods. And this is the kind of thing that will happen. Like we can think of also the golden calf episode where God also allowed for a lot of people to be killed. And so we learn that what Pinchas did, according to the text itself, perhaps is a good thing, because there was this plague that happened as punishment where the leaders, we read a few verses ago, could kill the people involved in the sexual cult. And because Pinchas killed 2 people who continued to engage in the cult, God's anger was able to be appeased and the plague could stop. So this is seen, it seems, by the text as a good thing. And the people who participated are named. So Zimri is the Israelite from the tribe of Shimon, Simeon. Cosbi is the woman who participated, the Midianite woman. And it's interesting that both are leaders. So that's interesting to note. Both are leaders in their respective tribes, part of a leader household, a leader tribe and class. And then the Israelites are told that they are allowed to take revenge on the Midianites because of what the Midianites did. So a lot here, but I want us to focus on, certainly we can entertain other questions or reflections, but how is it possible for at least for the modern reader to see that Pinchas gets this Brit Shalom? I want to mention also here that Aaron, Aharon, in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, we're told to be like Aaron, who rodef shalom, he chases after peace. So it's interesting that in Aaron's family line here is this blessing of peace. As we know, also the priestly blessing, you might know one of the things that the priests offer to others is a wish for peace. So we're going to read two modern commentaries together on this covenant of shalom and what that means. And JPS does translate it as a covenant of friendship. I'm not really sure why, but I want to hear where you are before we read some commentaries. So we'll take 2 or 3 reflections or questions here on how you make sense of this covenant of peace. So I will look forward to hearing where you're at the moment. So feel free to raise your hands, use the hand raise function, and I can go ahead and call on you, and then we can begin our discussion before reading more.
We do have an active chat, and I will.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Okay, great. Thank
There's
you.
Paul.
And I always say to folks, I'm not looking at the chat as I'm teaching and facilitating our discussion. I'm really focused on.
I would be happy to voice their questions in my words.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Paul
thank you.
and Andrea.
Paul and Andrea. Yeah. Thank you so much, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, so as a modern reader, I'm really struggling with this. I'm not going to lie. Because when we see examples of people, doing violent actions in name of religion, I mean, we see that all the time, and it's not held in high regard at all. So I'm really struggling with that. That's the first thing. The second is with respect to taking revenge on the Midianites. If I'm Moshe, I would have a problem with that because I'm connected to that group because the wife Sephora, father-in-law Yitro. I mean, much respect there. Basically, going after that side of my family. Like there's very little mentioned about that, but I would struggle with that too, Rabbi. I'm just wondering what your take is.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I will say about that, I think Zipporah, Moses' wife from Midian, folks might remember that when Moses himself leaves Egypt, when he's worried that people know he's a Hebrew, and he goes to Midian, the land of Midian, he sees the burning bush there, but first he encounters women at a well and he helps them out, and he marries Zipporah, Yitro, the Midianite priest's daughter. I would just say, I think she's the exception in the Torah, meaning the Torah generally thinks of Midian and Moab as an enemy. And we even just read in the story of Bilam that the Midianites are taking part in the fear and want Israel to be cursed in the story from last week's Torah portion. So I think that piece is, she's just an exception to the general way that the Midianites and Midian is portrayed as an enemy people. And just, going back to what you said before, absolutely, this is a timely text, and it's very troubling the way in which religion is used to support violence. It's extremely troubling. So I appreciate what you said, and I want to take a couple of others, and then we're going to try and read some commentaries and drash together, kind of interpret to see if we can get to a place together where we feel maybe a little bit of a sense of peace with the covenant of peace. So thank you, Paul. Okay, Andrea.
I was going to raise a kind of similar question,
Okay.
but it's not just Zipporah that's the exception. It's also Jethro, who's a hero, just not too far back. And
Great.
and I'm wondering, my question is just a little bit different. That the line of the priesthood doesn't go through Moses, and it goes through Aaron. And if that has anything to do with Moses's connection to the Midianites, or is it, a piece of me thinks it's the other way around, thinks that the Midianites get vilified in order to make sense of the priesthood going through Aaron.
Oh, wow. Okay. Those are great theories. I don't know. I really, I don't know. I'm left a little speechless. It's fantastic analysis there. I think it's really interesting to think about right, why didn't Moses get the priesthood? Why does it go through his brother? Maybe it is his attachment to the Midianites, or as you said, different ways of looking at it. Really interesting thoughts. Andrea, thank you. And so far, I'm hearing Andrea and Paul. Also, Andrea, you said you had some similar thoughts. I don't know if they were also related to struggling with this covenant of peace, but we're gonna talk about that in one moment. I'm gonna call on Noreen, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and then we're gonna read some modern commentaries together, and hopefully we'll have some more time for discussion. So Noreen, you can first tell me if I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yes, of course, that's fine. I think he gets the covenant of peace because he needed it. He needed to calm down. This is the first zealot in the Torah, and God wants him to calm down, so he gives him a covenant of peace, I think in the long run, hoping that he will calm down.
Great.
So I think, that's part of it. Also, we tend to judge these these incidents of violence in the Torah from a 21st century viewpoint. They're operating in another framework here in the Torah, and it's another time and another place. And ritual crimes were not tolerated. That was just not tolerated. So it's judged very harshly.
Great. Noreen, what crimes did you say were not tolerated? I didn't hear.
Ritual crimes.
Oh, ritual crimes. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so fair enough. I think it's a really, people who have studied with me before know that I like to talk both about pshat readings and drash readings, meaning when we read something out of the text as it was in its context, its literary context, its historical context, we are doing pshat, which is often translated as simple, but as I've shared many times, I like to, on the shoulders of my teachers, say it's more of a contextual reading, whereas drash is also what we are a midrashic people. Jews have been interpreting in ways that make sense, so that the Torah from many years ago makes sense to us in the 21st century. So I appreciate your kind of reminding us of that. We can remember certainly that, like you said so beautifully, ritual crimes were not tolerated. And nevertheless, I will say, as a modern reader, we want the text to sit well with us. And I'll say, of course, also that, some people might look at this text and say, this is a support for religious violence. This is support for, violence in the name of religion. You can look at a text, in an interpretive tradition, there are multiple ways to see texts. So what I'm going to present is one particular kind of one reading today. And and Noreen, you maybe, I don't think you read ahead, but you're exactly on the same page as the Netziv, a late 19th century rabbi who's quoted by Rabbi Shai Held, who says, this is what Pinchas needed. Pinchas needed a covenant of peace, the priesthood, in order to stay the priesthood, become a holier, more sacred priesthood, needed to shift from a place of violence and vengeance to a place of peace. So I'm going to read this text, and then we'll pause for a moment, and we may read one more, and then we'll discuss a little bit more, I think. So Rabbi Shai Held writes, is there room for this kind of vigilantism in the name of God? Numbers, the book of Numbers, apparently thinks that there is. On the Torah's account, God unequivocally affirms the heroism of Pinchas's deed. Yet there is something profoundly disturbing about this evaluation. Does this text not constitute a terrifying precedent, legitimating and perhaps even mandating vigilante violence? Not surprisingly, rabbinic tradition was decidedly ambivalent about Pinchas, seeing him both as a hero and as a potentially dangerous force needing to be contained and restrained. Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, also known as the Netziv, worries about the consequences of Pinchas's zealous act for his own sense of well-being. Why, asked the Netziv, does God grant Pinchas a covenant of peace? And here's where what Noreen said, is we're going to see again. In reward for calming the anger and wrath of the Blessed Holy One, he writes, God blessed him with the attribute of peace, that he, Pinchas, should not be quick-tempered or angry anymore, since it is in the nature of Pinchas's action, killing human beings with his own hands, to leave an intense emotional unrest in the soul afterwards. The blessing he received was to be in a state of peace and tranquility. On this reading, the blessing Pinchas receives is the one he most needs. A zealot needs help in discovering calm. Okay, so Shai Held, who's a beautiful writer, suggests here that afterwards, Pinchas was still in this agitated state and he needed to calm down. That Netziv, Shai Held's quoting the Netziv, doesn't necessarily criticize as much what happens before. God accepts what happens before. God's anger is calmed with Pinchas's action, but Pinchas is blessed with not doing anything like this ever again. So I think we could also drash a little bit here that, as Rabbi Shai Held points out, and as we're going to see in the next text, there is a lot of rabbinic ambivalence. The rabbinic texts on this Torah portion, on this section, are very mixed, and so we see the Netziv a little bit reflects that. And I think for me, at least, actually, the Netziv kind of calms my own anxiety about this text also. So I want to just I want to leave that with you, have you sit with that for a moment, and then we're going to read one more text here, and then we'll discuss together. So this is from the Musar Torah commentary. The Musar, which some of you might know, or Musar, is a movement and a practice and literature that developed in the 1800s and 1900s and late 1700s in Europe, kind of as a response to Enlightenment. The Musar movement was a way for yeshiva students, Talmudic yeshiva students, to be able to also perhaps look at themselves in more spiritual ways and work on their character traits in the service of learning Torah and doing mitzvot, being observant. But Musar has had, I've taught on Musar for MJL and others. Musar has had a little bit of a revival in the 20th century and 21st century, where there's been more literature published and republished that allows us to work on our character traits and our states of mind. So great, you can see I'm a fan of Musar, and so we're going to read this text together. Musar suggests that there is a time and a place for anger. Avraham ben Harambam, the son of the Maimonides, Rambam, for instance, writes that forbearance, arichat apayim, being slow to anger, is only necessary when our personal concerns and worldly desires are at stake, not when there is a religious issue. He specifically cites Pinchas as an example of passion for a religious purpose. So far, Avraham ben Harambam is supporting Pinchas's action. But Rabbi Pamela Wax says something, she expands on what he wrote. Nonetheless, he undermines his own argument by saying that even in religious issues, one must not be quick to avenge and punishments. There must first be verifications, deliberation, inquiry, and ascertainment of the need for punishment, which of course does not take place in our Torah portion. And there's one more, I just included this last piece, I'll read it, but I'm going to focus on the first part of what we just read. Rabbi Yehuda Leib Chasman similarly takes note that Pinchas is rewarded with the Brit Shalom because his motives were pure, rather than for any personal reasons that would have been deemed transgressive. So this excerpt here from Rabbi Pamela Wax also shows there is this, on the one hand, Pinchas is not totally chastised because his motivations were pure. He was loyal to God and didn't want to see people not being loyal to God. And so he was rewarded with a Brit Shalom. And on the other hand, we can see that even within rabbinic tradition, there is this tension. Pinchas, perhaps because he was looking out not for himself, according to tradition, but looking out for what was right religiously, he wasn't, he is deemed approved of. And at the same time, Avraham ben Harambam goes on to say that really this kind of behavior, there should be a just deliberation rather than the story in the Torah isn't 110% kosher because there wasn't like a trial by one's peers, let's say. Instead, there was this very impulsive and zealous act that isn't really ideally what's supposed to happen. So I kind of want to present to you that at least seeing the tension in rabbinic literature, this dialectic, this conversation, did Pinchas do what was right? Did he not? Is there a way to excuse it? Is there a way to say, well, he wasn't motivated for his own personal benefit. He really just cared so deeply about what he thought was purely the right thing to do. And at the same time, I was going to add one more piece here, that as Noreen said earlier, and as the Netziv says, Pinchas and the priesthood were given this blessing of peace because the idea of anything like this happening ever again is perhaps unacceptable. So I want to hear where you're landing in seeing these rabbinic texts, seeing this tension and this ambivalence about Pinchas's behavior in connection to also getting this reward of Brit Shalom, where you're landing with this. How does this all land on you? Does it make you feel maybe a little bit better about the Torah text? Not so much, or curious, wherever you might be landing. So I will look forward to hearing a few of your comments. Okay, Jack.
Can you hear me?
Yep, go right ahead.
I look at this a little differently. All the commentaries that I've read keep saying that it was easy getting the Israelites out of Egypt, but it was very difficult getting Egypt out of the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, at this point in time, it's 40 plus years later. We're dealing with a completely different population. They're not talking about how great Egypt was. They want to get on with their lives and get to the promised land. And as I see this, the population is a completely different group of people. We're now dealing with younger people. We're dealing with a different mentality, and they want to move on with their lives. And Pinchas is, to me, here is moving on, believing in, having faith in God, and believing in what they're going into.
Okay, so very interesting, this generational divide. Jack is noting that, as we know, the Israelites were punished as a whole because of the episode with the scouts or the spies who did not have enough faith in God to go into and conquer the land of Israel, of Canaan. And so according to the story, the Israelites have to wander in the desert for 40 years. 40 years is considered a generation, and all the generation, everyone who was a slave in Egypt has to die out, except for Caleb and Joshua, who did express faith in God and in the land itself. And so, Jack, you're noticing, you're reminding us that we're in a new generation here, and this generation is, passionate and zealous and ready to go into the land and serve God in a deeper way. So it's really fascinating. I appreciate that insight. Great observation. Thank you for that. I did see another hands up before. Andrea, I want to call on you, but I just want to see, I saw someone's hands that did not yet share a thought today. So I wanted to see, Evan, great. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and unmute?
Yeah, I'm glad I'm here today to learn about this, because I think that's what it's there for now, is to learn from, but not to emulate, except to be restrained. it's not a model. Pinchas isn't a model.
Great. Okay, great. So it sounds like this reading of brief shalom as a wish for future kind of behavior and restraint speaks to you.
Yes.
Great. Okay, thank you. So we'll take one more. And I saw Rosa's hand first. And Andrea, I'm sorry. I like to call on people every day, but thank you for understanding. Okay, Rosa,
Yes.
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question because this is probably one of my favorite parshas in the Bible with Pinchas. My thought about it was always that Pinchas had, because he was gifted with all the high priests would come directly from him, that it was honoring God that he was doing this, because the individuals that came were, I guess, in a sense, prideful when they came in front of Moshe and started doing this sexual whatever. They went in their tent and were doing what they were doing, that Pinchas was honoring his God, honoring Adonai with what he did, because this wasn't the first time. They were actively, from the past Torah, that Balak had, had the Midian told him, listen, I can't curse them, but I can tell you how you can get to them. And so this was rampant already when Pinchas did this to Zimri and Corp, I think her name is. So I'm confused, and I never saw it as he was moving out of being overzealous like towards himself, but I saw it more of like he was honoring God and what God had asked them to do.
Yeah. So I appreciate your comment. I don't think what you're saying and what we've kind of explored today I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. Meaning he was zealous and he was loyal to God, and he did express that in this violent act. I think at the same time, for some modern readers, not for everyone, of course, but for some modern readers, it is difficult to nevertheless, maybe we would say to ourselves, are there other ways to serve God? Do we have to act that way? When we believe something strongly, is it necessary to go that far? So I just want to, I appreciate what you're sharing. And I want to say, I think we can accept the Torah's presentation, and what you're saying is positive about Pinchas, and at the same time question the way that he acted on his loyalty. So it is 11:15, so I do need to end, and I just want to say at the end here, I saved this for the very end because I thought I might cry. So recently I unfortunately lost a nephew whose name was Yakir, and his Hebrew birthday is actually today. He only died about a month ago. And there was actually, Yakir was very opinionated and very loyal to his ideas. And at the same time, there was a calm and a peace about him. And so I just want to, with you today, dedicate this learning to my nephew, Yakir, and to his memory. And, if we had more time, there's so many other qualities that he had that I could talk about. But, looking at Pinchas and then thinking about my nephew, thinking both about someone who's fiercely loyal, but also somehow able to be to cultivate a sense of peace and calm is what I wish for all of us in Yakir's memory, and in something that we can learn from the Parashat today. So thank you everyone for being here, and I'll just, if you have further questions, I didn't do it earlier, my email is abby@explorejewish.com, and you're welcome to email me, and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. So thank you again for being here and for sharing your ideas and for learning together today.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
We dedicate this in Yakir's honor, and I hope for everyone to have a Shabbat and a lifetime filled with calm and loyalty.
Thank you.